I've managed to cover a lot during my now almost 2-year tenure on YouTube. But through all of that, I'm sure most people will probably just remember me as that Fire Emblem guy, or that Thracia776 guy, or maybe really obscurely that guy who still hasn't finished his Indie Creates retrospective, or who makes really crude videos about political gaffes. But there's one thing that I've wanted to address, and eventually will address when I get the chance, that is one of my biggest passions of all time, and that is the Metroid franchise. This may come as a shock to some people, but Metroid franchise is my favorite game franchise of all time. It's the only franchise in which I own a copy of, either digitally or physically, of every game in the series, and have completed every game in the series. Not even Fire Emblem or Legend of Zelda can say that. Although, even that wouldn't include, like, the Philips CDI games, but I'm getting off track. So, obviously this shouldn't come as a shock with this now to know that I was extremely ecstatic upon the release of another Metroid 2 remake last week. And I picked it up right away, and as of this, I've beaten the game 4 times now, and I feel like I've played enough of it to give some quick thoughts, a little bit of analysis on the game. So then, another Metroid 2 remake, which I'll just call AM2R from now on just for convenience, is a very apt zero-mission style remake of Metroid 2, which is a pretty vitally important game in the Metroid franchise. This is the game, after all, that introduced Samus's iconic big-shouldered Varia-suit look, as well as series staples like the spider ball and the space jump. But unfortunately, it's just not really a game that's playable nowadays. It's a victim of time. It's very clunky, there's no map, it's very awkward to control, and it just hasn't really aged well, just like the original Metroid. Now, Zero Mission fixed that problem effortlessly for the original Metroid. It even had the original game on it after you beat it in order to play. Now, obviously, you couldn't do the same thing with AM2R, but they have, in a sense, basically given the same treatment here. And to my knowledge, the game plays exactly like Zero Mission. I couldn't find any noticeable difference in raw gameplay stuff, although there are some very significant differences that I am very fond of. For example, when you're running and you come up against a small ledge, you can just tap the jump button to immediately climb it. It always looked kind of silly to see Samus continuously jumping over these tiny, like, you know, shin-high or waist-high obstacles. It's kind of, you know, feels like Samus is a lot more nimble, and in that sense, you can now instantly morph by pressing a single button as opposed to tapping down twice. And you can do similar things for the spider ball. You can turn it on pressing a single button. And similar to Super Metroid and its really goofy moonwalk, you can now have a button dedicated to locking Samus's aim and direction in place, which allows you to move around in the 2 dimensions, up, down, left, right, without having what direction she's facing changed. And this is very, very helpful when fighting certain bosses and certain Metroids. And thankfully, if these options appear cumbersome to you, you can always change them. There are humongous amounts of control options for this game, and that's really impressive because it's something that more games should do. So if you don't want to have the climbing ledges, you can turn it off. If you don't want to be able to morph into a ball with a single button, you can turn that off. If, like me, you want to be able to do that and also morph by double tapping down twice, you can have both options. And that's what's really great about this game. And as for the Metroid part, which is the big thing about Metroid 2, the whole point of that game is you're going down to SR3D8 to exterminate all the Metroids on the planet so the Space Pirates can't take control of them and use them to spread terror across the galaxy. This game is also about that, but what's really great is that the Metroids are all redone to be much more engaging as an enemy. Even Alpha and Gamma Metroids can be cumbersome, challenging, and even frightening to deal with. Alpha Metroids, so you should first fight, they start out pretty weak. You can now only hit Metroids in their specific green kind of like fleshy parts, as opposed to just anywhere on their body for the most part. But what's really great is that the Metroids actually know this, or seem to know this, and they'll actually take measures to protect themselves. When you start off, this isn't really apparent, but very quickly Alpha Metroids will they'll start hugging the ground, they'll actually dodge your missiles, and even Gamma Metroids with this as well. Zeta and Omega Metroids are now planted firmly on the ground, but even they have ways to defend. Zeta Metroids will swipe missiles out of the way, and Omega Metroids can jump and breathe fire and do all sorts of things to make hitting them extremely difficult. And thankfully, like Zero Mission, there's now a map, which was a huge problem with both the original Metroid and Metroid 2. The graphical limitations just made every area look basically the same, and that doesn't help when there's no way of knowing exactly where you are. So now you have both diversity in area design and a working map, and the game also tells you how many Metroids there are in each area that you have to defeat before the game will open up and allow you to proceed. And that's a really, really great inclusion. It's small quality of life stuff, but it makes the game more playable, and that's the biggest problem with Metroid 2. Everything else about Metroid 2 is great. It's just really cumbersome to play, and that's what this remake is focusing on, and that's the really great thing about it. And by the way, all the areas in the game, they have unique things about them. The hydro plant has water pipes that you can traverse around. The distribution center has these, really trigger-happy bombs that if anything hits them, they explode, and you have to manage ways to get through some areas without setting them off. And they also have these EMP bombs that also act as gates for certain areas you need to go through. And then you have the industrial plant, which has a lot of automated contraptions meant for assembling stuff that are now stage obstacles that you have to go through. Also, similar to Zero Mission, in this way of introducing new areas and for you to explore, there are also new things for you to get. Like Zero Mission did, you can now get the super missiles, gravity suit, power bombs, and other items that weren't available in the original Metroid 2. And the game also includes secondary objectives for you to accomplish aside from killing all the Metroids. They're very small things, but you are also tasked with finding the research team deployed to SR3D8, as well as the search and rescue team sent to find them. And it's little things like this that make the game more fleshed out in terms of story and function. And this is also reflected in the log entries that make a miraculous return from the Prime games. They're now automated and only happen for new areas and bosses and other small things. It's not a huge scan everything in the game like the original Prime series, but it's small things like this that really flesh out the game. And there's even stuff like optional areas that you don't even have to go to and optional bosses. It's really great to see these in Metroid games. One area that may sort of annoy some Metroid 2 purists out there is that the game has a completely, completely invigorating soundtrack. It's not really mostly atmospheric stuff like the original Metroid 2. There are some remixes from the original Metroid 2, along with some completely original tracks and some remixes from past Metroid games. And there's now a specific tune for every area in the game, which helps to give every area its own feel. Like I said, this may annoy some people that preferred the really atmospheric pieces of the original Metroid 2, but I feel these are a straight improvement, and I think others may see this as well. As for actual criticisms against the game, they're really minor, kind of nitpicky things for the most part. I find that Gamma Metroids can be a hassle to deal with because their hitbox seems not perfectly consistent. There are times in which you should be hitting them perfectly fine, but the missiles just bounce off what should be where you're supposed to hit them. And I feel like it's much too easy for Zeta and especially Omega Metroids to trap you in a corner and basically almost kill you. There's really nothing you can do about that. Yeah, it kind of adds to their menacingness, but it just feels unfair that if you accidentally miss a jump and get knocked back into the wall, and the Omega Metroid will just hit you over and over again, and you really won't be able to get out, and that can be a pain to deal with. I'm also a little miffed that there's only ending stills for beating the game under a certain amount of time, and not for getting 75% or 100% of the items, but this is a fan game and it is free, so I guess I can kind of let that slide. And as in other terms of minor things, while each of the areas is completely distinct and none of them really feel the same, I feel like the backgrounds in some of these areas look kind of bland. A lot of them have like a single color and not really a lot of background stuff like you could see in Zero Mission in its areas. This is, again, kind of nitpicky, but I think it's more than made up for in other areas of the game. All in all, another Metroid 2 remake is, in my eyes, the new Metroid 2, and this is basically the first Metroid game we've gotten in almost 10 years, and it feels great. Which makes it all the more infuriating that Nintendo was trying to make sure people don't play this. They've issued DMCA takedowns against download sites hosting the game. They haven't issued C&Ds to the developers, but it's really dickish of them to know, they must have known, that this game has been in development since 2005, and they haven't done anything about it. They haven't sent C&Ds or DMCAs for any of the demos that were released or any of the blog posts for 11 years, and they have shut down fan games that have only been announced and have no work on them. So yeah, dick move Nintendo. This is probably only done because they don't want competition with Metroid Prime Federation Force, but if that's really the case, it just shows that they don't really have any confidence in that game, and oh my god, if you look at the like and dislike ratios on anything related to that game, maybe they should be worried. But that's enough bashing on Nintendo for this stuff, and more, let's praise the work that was put into another Metroid 2 remake. I don't really want to give a score because scores are cancer, so I'll just say I wholeheartedly recommend that you play this game. If you haven't played a Metroid game before, this is a great place to start. It's very welcoming, it's very playable. If you have been ostracized from the Metroid series, this might be the game you need to reinvigorate your love for the franchise. I know it's been really hard for us with all the lack of games that have been released, or the quality of games that have been released. I know we don't really have it as hard as like Half-Life fans, oh man. But this breathes a spark of hope almost, and I haven't been happier playing a game in a long time. Go play another Metroid 2 remake. Tell the creators of the game that you give them your thanks. This has been Model Omega, and thank you very much for watching.